Hello, and welcome to the Leading with Andrew show with me, Andrew. I'm so glad you're here. This is a show all about communication and the universal motivation to get better at it. So whether you are an established speaker, or you are facilitating to top executives, or you just want to get better at articulating what it is that you want, I promise you an energized dose of tips and tools. Every episode, I bring you guests who are extraordinary communicators across several industries. So let's get into it. Rob Stewart is a Dubai-based psychologist specializing in leadership development, culture, and employee engagement. Originally a counseling psychologist, he had a successful private practice in central London for a number of years. At that time, he helped clients with varying mental health issues. He also held a position as a lecturer, teaching future therapists their trade. Rob also included executive coaching into his practice, working with professionals to establish and maintain high performance. Later in his career, he upskilled to become a business psychologist and moved into the field of learning and development. He created his own organization where he now works globally with organizations and their future leaders. He creates and facilitates leadership development courses for organizations, having recently worked with Relks on their global management course, Property Finder on their senior leadership course, and Gilead Middle East for their SLT Strategic Away Day. He is a lover of all things psychology and is looking to publish his book in the near future. He incorporates the latest in behavioral science and neuroscience into his work. Rob, welcome.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
I am very excited. It's the first time I've had a business psychologist on the podcast, so I've probably got a lot to ask you. Okay. But to get started, what got you into loving neuroscience and psychology?
Good question. So you know those really annoying people who know really early on in their life what they want to do, which is not the majority. It's not the majority. I was one of those people. I remember being about 14 years old and thinking to myself, I want to be a psychologist. Growing up, I always struggled to feel like part of the group, always felt a little bit on the outside, didn't feel like I bonded very well with other people. And I just recognized in my early teens that when I took the time to really talk to people and they told me about their problems and they told me what was going on in their lives and I could sit and I could listen and give a little bit of advice, I really found a peace with that. I really found this is where I feel like I connect with people. And then at that point I was like, I think I want to be a psychologist. And I remember talking to my mum about it and her going, oh, okay. She also then turned around to me and said, you realize that now you have to actually do some work at school, like if you're actually going to make that happen. So everything from there really followed that route.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. And how long have you been in Dubai now?
So Dubai, I've been here about a year and 3 months now. So November 2022, I moved here. Yeah.
And how are you finding work in Dubai in terms of working here as opposed to working back in the UK?
Yeah, it's very different.
Okay.
It's very different. Part of the reason that I moved here is that London in particular is very saturated. There's 10,000 of me doing the same thing, trying to break into companies that you don't know and create those working relationships. Incredibly difficult. I'd been to Dubai before, I'd worked in Dubai before, so I had an idea that it was much more informal and there's a lot more opportunity. So it seemed like the right thing to do. With regards to the work itself, I think it's very, very similar. One thing I would say is slightly different is how there seems to be the Dubai time thing where you work with clients and they're very, very interested and you're like, okay, great, this is fantastic, can't wait for this to happen. And then suddenly there's sort of tumbleweed and you're like, oh, okay, I guess someone's not interested. And then a week before the time you initially agreed upon, out comes a phone call or the email. It's like, right, let's do this. And you're like, oh, next week? Right, okay. And there's a little bit more formality in the UK. But thankfully, that's the way I work. I love working like that. And, if you can be flexible, you can. Absolutely. But I will take the more relational based work here over the formality of the UK any day. I love it. I love working with people and working closely with them and keeping it away from all the formal stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you started with a practice and then you decided to go into business psychology. What made you want to make that change?
So I remember when I did my undergraduate, I'd always enjoyed loads of different elements of psychology. Counseling was absolutely my primary. I was like, this is where my heart is. Secondary to that was business, and I just really enjoyed how it could work in work. And then my third one was sports psychology. And so I primed myself and moved in the direction of the counseling psychology. but always had in the back of my mind that the great thing about psychology is the ability to move between, the different sectors. So I had my private practice in London, and it was going very well, and I was enjoying it. The only thing with it is, well, there's a few things. Okay. So one, there's a few
We've got
things.
the time.
Oh
Rob.
yeah,
we've got the time.
And let me get the list out. So one of them is there's very unsociable hours. So people want to see you before work at 7, 8, 9 in the morning, and then after work at 7, 8, 9 at night. Not very conducive to like a family environment. The other thing is if you're thinking about the number of clients you need to see each week to earn a good living, you're looking at 20 to 25 people.
Oh, wow.
So, you're filling up, 5 people a day, maybe sometimes more, sometimes less. But if you think only a few of those have to have some complex trauma, some personality disorders in there, it's very intense work. And I did sort of find myself at various times sort of coming home, or my partner saying to me, you're dead behind the eyes, like, where are you? And all the supervision that we have to go through is great. Maybe we're having our own therapy, that's great as well. But it takes its toll. It's wonderful work, and I look back really fondly on it. And it's deep work. It's valuable. You see change in people's lives, so that's wonderful. But it's hard. So they got to a point where, I was thinking about family, and I was like, what could I do that I still love, but is probably more conducive to that family environment, maybe a bit more 9 to 5. And I thought business. So I went back to university to get my master's in occupational psychology and do the business psychology side of things.
And now you're rocking it in businesses.
Something like that.
Focusing on leadership, right? Focusing on leadership. What has been one of the biggest trends, I would say, that you've noticed about leaders in your field?
One of the biggest trends. So something I've been really connected to is the importance of psychological safety. That's a big one for me. And I really wanted to come to this region and think about, what does it look like? Is it being considered by leaders? Is it being taken seriously? Is it being implemented? And the initial conversations I had with people were very much around, look, psychological safety is incredibly important in this region, but it's just not happening.
Oh, and people were clear and honest with that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
People were clear and honest with that. So, you and I know, and for the listeners, that psychological safety is this ability to share mistakes, concerns, and ideas without the fear of retribution or humiliation. So can I turn around to my manager and say, look, I've made this mistake. They'll be disappointed, but they won't chew me out. We can think about what we can do to solve the problem. Can they turn around to me if I'm their manager and say, look, I've got this idea, and I'm going to acknowledge that. Maybe not go, okay, let's go with it, but acknowledge it. So, create that positive loop for future ideas. But of course, the base of that is that vulnerability to speak up to someone in power. And when you do that, you're risking your career. And the thing about this region is the majority of us are expats. And it's, if you don't have that visa, then, you don't have that job, you don't have that visa, you can't be here.
Exactly.
And there's just, from what I get from people and what they tell me from businesses, even though they're trying to create environments where there is psychological safety and there is that culture, there is still a hangover of, it's better just to keep your head below the surface and not, make any waves, not cause any problems, and just do your job. But what we know from psychological safety, unfortunately, is that's where it leads to hiding mistakes, failures come out. I think Boeing, a perfect example of that I've been talking about recently. I was just doing some work with an aviation company, and I was like, let me talk to you about psychological safety. And
really
here's
cold
Boeing.
on that aircraft really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's something that I know the leaders of Dubai are really keen on innovation and pushing innovation.
Absolutely.
And I think that's fantastic. And I think it's why, the whole of the GCC region is doing as well as it is in comparison to more mature markets in Western Europe, North America, etc. But for me as a psychologist, I really do believe that at the core of innovation is psychological safety. I am just not going to try anything new if I don't believe I can trust my manager and I can feed back to them and they can feed back to me. So I really do believe it's just fundamental. But then if you take a step back from that, I think this is, on a bigger picture, it's about ego. And I think that's really where everything lies, because
Absolutely.
do leaders have the ability to stand back from themselves and recognize their ego? And, you know, am I supportive of people, or, you know, is my ego getting in the way? And I don't want to say ego like in a, almost like a megalomaniac type.
Oh, no, it would show up in multiple ways.
Precisely, because you'll know yourself, when we do our work, we talk to people, we talk to leaders all the time, you know, we talk empathy, trust, all of these lovely traits, and all of the people in our groups will go, yes, I want to do that. So, well, no problem then. We must be all really empathetic, right? We all must doing the right thing. But interestingly, you look at something like the empathy paradox, where leaders generally rate their empathy going up over the time of their careers, but you look at everyone else and where they rate them and it's going down. So you see this kind of cross on the graph. Something's not happening, right? There's something missing there. And I think we're not necessarily approaching leadership with the kind of open mind and growth mindset that a lot of us should be. And I say that for leaders, but that's probably all professionals everywhere.
I think one of the things that what comes up all the time, and it's the first time I've ever heard of the empathy paradox. So I understand it completely. I understand the idea behind it, but I've never heard it mapped like that, which is really interesting. And what I find, and I say this all the time when I'm facilitating in a classroom, is like, yeah, we've got to do teamwork. Yes, absolutely. Teamwork makes the dream work. And the moment they leave the classroom, everything defaults back to normal. And I think one of the things is, so there's a couple of things that I want to pick up on over there. Is one of the things you were saying is psychological safety creates a space for creativity. And I think to break it down on exactly what that looks like, particularly for the people that are watching and listening, is if you're psychologically safe in an environment, what tends to happen is you don't have to focus on how you are being interpreted or how you are presenting to people, because you feel accepted and welcome. So that immediately, in terms of what you need to function as a human being, ticks that off the box. So now you're like, okay, cool. Now I'm feeling good. And that all of a sudden is what creates space for you to bring in or get into flow, to bring in the creativity. And then the second part over there for me is, and I get this all the time, and we were talking about this before the session today about, you know, a lot of my work going into AI? And one of the things we were looking at was a coaching and mentoring language model built into generative AI because of this particular reason, where people are turning around and defaulting back to how things have always been done because there is no time. We've built these massive businesses, that are just scaling on commerce and not scaling on value for people. And one of the things that came up also, we were talking about briefly before the session today, was from the Deloitte Human Capital Trends report. 43% of people are saying that they are leaving businesses not feeling any better or developed than what they were when they joined. And that's because we're pushing people to constantly create, but we're not creating an environment for them to be creative. So it's this constant paradox. And I think time at the end of the day, and just to clean that up a little bit, when you make time to harness, I'm not quite sure of the word there, that space to, okay, doing a check-in with your team, not just organizing a pizza party, doing a proper check-in with your team, going, how's everybody doing today? But it's that water cooler talk that people forget is so important. So psychological safety, I think, is, I mean, I'm really, really lucky to work in a very psychologically safe environment. So I feel a lot of my creativity coming out, and I'm able to hone in on my skills because there's other things that I don't have to worry about or that I have to be concerned about, or how I'm being perceived, because I know that I'm in an environment where when feedback is given, it's respectful, it's done privately and respectfully. And when praise is due, praise is given. And as a testament to where I work, that has allowed me to become incredibly creative. That has probably, one of the things that it's done for me as well, is instilled confidence in me to really step out of my comfort zone, right? And not throw myself into a situation that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, but just in the past 2 months, the steps that I've taken outside of my comfort zone, I probably never would. I wouldn't have done as easily in previous environments that I've worked in before. So psychological safety, I think, it's again a term that I think gets thrown around really easily, and people want a checkbox, I think,
Yes.
Of like, okay, so if we have an open style office, tick. If we have the open door policy sign on our doors, it's like that live, love, laugh sign that everybody has up in their apartments, but it's check. And then we've got that check. We do casual Fridays, check. We've got all of these things that we check box, but at the end of the day, you are dealing with human beings.
Yes.
And people tend to forget that. And we just want to productivity, produce. And you still expect people burnt out to be creative in an environment that if they don't be creative and they don't produce, they're threatened.
Yeah. And this is why I love psychology. And at the core of it, so much of it is counterintuitive. It's so counterintuitive. You talk to leaders and you say, look, if you can, in fact, a really good operationalized example of this was Google's 20% time, where they said to their engineers, you have 20% of your time, so 1 day a week, which is a significant amount of time, to work on whatever you want to work on. Have that time. It does have to be something for work, and you are going to have to present it. So there was that outline, but it's your time. And from that came Google AdWords and Gmail. Like those are two massive parts. They're huge parts of Google. But the concept is so counterintuitive. I'm actually going to give you time off to make you more productive. And so many people just can't think in that way. It just doesn't make sense to them. So psychological safety is the same. It's like, look, I want to give you this freedom. I'm going to invite you to make mistakes. And that's going to allow us to be more innovative. And that sounds terrifying to me, And you use the word mistakes and people go, what? And I think little shout out to Amy Emerson, her most recent book, I think, is called The Best Way to Fail or The Way to Fail. But it's great because she's making that distinction between mistakes and intelligent failures, which I think is so, so important, particularly when you talk to, you've got experience in aviation. I've just done a session with an aviation company as well. Safety is at the top of what they do. So if leaders are sitting there going, I just let my people do what they want to do. And then again, it's this, that's not what psychological safety is.
Exactly.
It's not about being nice. It's not about letting people just do what they want to do. A big part of it is sanctioning violations. Another big part of it is setting the frame, is like framing what is expected and what isn't, what isn't okay. So I think one of the first things with psychological safety is absolutely being clear on what it really means, and all of those lovely elements about let's make sure we've got a foosball table in the office.
Oh, the good old foosball table.
Exactly right, ping pong, whatever it might be. But for me, what it really breaks down to, and this is why I have the utmost respect for all the leaders that I work with and I empathize with all of them, is for me, all of this comes down to the neurology of the brain and how the way our brain has evolved over a huge period of time to either be focused on achievement, on task, because we have to hunt, we have to find something, or we've stopped doing that, we're with the people who are important to us, we're tribal, we're social creatures, we're mammals, so I'm around people, I'm thinking about people. And we're very good at doing that or that.
Not both.
But not both, not at the same time. And that's, for me, where leaders struggle, because we've just said earlier, don't we? They don't sit there and go, I don't want to be trustworthy. I don't want to be empathetic, but it's not happening. Why isn't it happening? So if you've got that intention, but then the action's not following it, what is happening there? And for me, it is that nature of your brain going, I'm either doing a task or I'm sitting with this person. We see it all the time. We're trying to do something or we're on our phone and our partner's saying something to us and we go, what? We can't multitask like the way we think. And so I really feel for leaders, because they have the pressure from the organization to get the job done, whatever those KPIs and those objectives might be. But at the same time, it is their people who are going to facilitate that. And they have to demonstrate the empathy, the trust, the psychological safety. They have to coach their people, create that environment for those people to do that. And actually switching between the two, it's huge cognitive load, and leaders talk to me and they say, Rob, I'll know those days that I've done that because I come home and I'm tired. I may have been sat behind a chair all day, but I am tired. Like my brain is tired because I have been, people task. Yeah. And that's just, it's hard. And this is more of a philosophical approach to leadership, but it's why I do believe that leadership is essentially at its core quite sacrificial. It should be quite sacrificial, because you're coming in knowing if you're going to do it well, it's going to take its toll on you.
Absolutely. You touched on a point there that I absolutely love. So when the leaders that say to you, they come home and when they've been really people-centric and people-focused, I'm tired. And it's brilliant. So whenever I do executive coaching with psychometric tools, when we talk about areas for somebody that is a slight limitation, for instance, I say it's not that you can't do this, but when you focus your energy on something that shows up as a limitation as opposed to something that comes up naturally for you, you are going to be more tired. And then that ties back into something that I was literally saying a few minutes ago is people, it's not that you don't, it's also that you don't have the time to change because it's easier to default, but the time to recover from when you start applying yourself to new practices, it makes you tired.
Yes.
In the beginning, it's going to make you tired. It's like when you're learning a new dance. You're tired because the dancing isn't coming, or the routine isn't coming to you naturally. So you really have to be cognitively present to learn it, 1, 2 step, 1, 2 step, 1, 2 step. And then eventually it gets to a point of where if I throw a bucket of cold water over your head at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, do the routine, you can do it without even thinking. And that's where you can get to. But that's why people don't want to take the time, because it's not only takes away from these big KPIs that they have or whatever the business has set for them, key objectives, but it also takes a longer time to recover.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible. And one of the things over there as well, that's again, I recently did a talk and included a lot of the Deloitte's Insights report from 2024. I had to learn it really quickly because the new report for 2024 came out a day before I gave this talk. So what was coming in there is people know in every one of the trends, the 9 trends that come up in the report, it's on page 2 or page 3 of every part of the trend is 73%, 65%, 80% of people know what they have to do. 12% are doing great things. And that's scary. And that's one of the biggest gaps now. And if leaders are struggling now to move from intention and knowledge in a classroom to taking action and sacrificing, like you were saying, sacrificing the time, sacrificing the recovery to get used to implementing those sort of practices into your day to day, you're going to get left behind. People are becoming more and more focused on walking away from a workday with feeling more fulfilled. And if they don't, it's a driving factor in why people would leave. And if you look at the various generations that we have that are in the workforce now, I think there's 5 generations in the workforce, soon to be 6 with Generation Alpha coming up in 10 years. But one of the things that is coming up is we all have resilience. But what we apply that resilience to is different from generation to generation. So the older generations live to work, whereas the younger generations work to live, because they just need an income and they want to be feeling like they're contributing to something much larger. And managing them is very different. So now you've got all of these external assaults that are coming your way. You've got technology that's advancing at a rapid pace. You've got all of your trends reports, all of the insights that are coming your way going, hey, you thought we had to focus on the human in COVID. Now you probably need to focus on the human more. And one of the things that they touch on as well is the human sustainability. We've gotten to a point, and something that I recognized really quickly was we were going at a really rapid pace in 2019, and then we came to a grinding halt in 2020. But we're now operating faster and larger and have scaled ratio-wise so much more in the last, let's call it 3 years because we're still in the beginning of 2024, but we scaled so much in the last 3 years to get to a faster pace from zero, as opposed to the time that we had to build up to the pace that we were operating in 2019, and people are starting to feel it. Burnout is climbing at a rapid rate. I don't want to quote a percentage because I don't have the latest figures on hand, but burnout is happening, and people think burnout is going to be fixed with the long Eid holiday that's coming up in April, 5 days off. Woohoo! Burnout, I think, takes up to a year and a half, almost 2 years to fully recover from, to really, really, really be able to reapply yourself. And the biggest gap, the biggest sort of cleanup from that part of the discussion is it's going from knowing to doing. And that's where we're struggling at the moment, because people, again, are just, change is hard. Change is hard. But I was saying to, I was working with a client a couple of days ago, and they've done phenomenal things in the during COVID. They were in the session that we were doing with them. They were talking about phenomenal things that they were doing in 2020. So that's as far back as I knew or heard of within the room. And then every year since then, they've just done incredible things. And last year was a record-breaking year for the HR teams and the business in general. And when we walked away from the couple of days that we spent with this client, they have recognized the fact that you also can't expect the same people to come up with new creative ideas that have been doing the same job for years and years and years. Do you not think every other business is doing that? You know, do you not think Zara is getting their leaders into a team to figure out how they can beat their competitors in a strategy session that is getting offside? But the one thing that I really, really saw in this client, which just inspired me so much, is they recognized the fact that they need something that a previous guest on my podcast, John Sane, was talking about, is a tomorrow team. And it was how you were talking about that creative space that created Gmail. It was the same with Steve Jobs and the team that created the Macintosh. It wasn't a team of engineers that were already working for Apple. It was a team of engineers that weren't working for Apple that came on board. They were put into a separate building, and he put a pirate flag on their building and was like, this is the tomorrow team. And they disrupted what computing was and came up with the Macintosh.
I think it's so important when it comes to creativity. You know, you'll know if I sit there with you and put you in front of a computer and go, right, be creative, that's not going to happen, right? No, it's not going to happen. When are we most creative? Like if anyone now listening sort of thinks, okay, when do I have my best ideas? Just think about that for a second. And generally what you find people say is they're like, I'm in the shower, I'm driving, I am, walking the dog, or just walking, right? So the most important thing is we all have the ability to be creative, but are we given the conditions to do it? And I think that's so key as well. And again, that is something like the Google example, which is you're going to have to cut out time, or you're going to have to put that time into someone's role for them to do that. You can't just expect them to, work as you would 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and do all of that as well. So I think you need leaders having an understanding of people more so than ever, which is so important.
How do you communicate as a leader that has now come to you and gone, hey, we're really passionate about psychological safety. We've got big things that we want to do. We've got a wonderful vision in this business, and we want to start communicating that we're taking psychological safety seriously, and we're also putting it into practice. So practice aside, these are the things that you've recommended. How do you communicate in a business, or how would you recommend a leader communicates in a business that they're moving towards a more psychologically safe environment?
It's a really good question, and I think it's really vital as well. So, the majority of the training sessions that we facilitate, we will be focusing on the individuals, and we'll be looking at their specific actions and behaviors, what they're saying, etc. And that's incredibly important. But I think there's something about operationalizing it throughout the organization, in whether you combine that with existing values or create new values around that, but something which really, I guess, promotes it in a way that's visible to people, because we just know, particularly something with psychological safety, where you need it to A, flow down, but B, be adopted by the majority. Hoping that individuals just take up that mantle and do it for the sake of doing it I think it's just a falsity. I just don't think you're going to see it. Apart from anything, again, going back to what we said, it's not that people don't take it seriously or don't want to. It's just that the natural way the habits we fall into as human beings means we become a bit more autocratic, a bit more tell than ask, etc. We have lots of micro messages that we give to people without meaning to, and it sort of underlies how we're actually feeling deep down if we're disappointed, etc. So I would always be talking to an organization and go, okay, great. If I come into your organization and I'm a new employee, how do I know you take it seriously? okay, maybe my manager is saying demonstrating situational humility and telling me when they don't know something or they've got this wrong before. Fantastic, wonderful. They're setting the purpose with me before we start a project, so I know why we're doing what we're doing. Great, all of that. But how do I know the organization takes it seriously? And I think that's where it comes down to: is this somehow within our values, within our corporate strategy? But these are the things we need to speak to. I think when we look at creating strategic visions, we're looking at what we want to achieve over how many years. But for me, going back to it, it's the how. I think bigger picture for me, and you kind of alluded to this earlier. There will always be a conflict between organizations wanting to profit and trying to create environments for people. Because we're in a consumerist capitalist society where that profit is fundamentally, we've got to meet shareholders' needs. Okay, I totally understand that, and I'm not necessarily saying we should prioritize one or the other, but I do believe that we should be making space for both. And I think this is also what makes leaders' jobs hard as well, because we said earlier, well, why would they change? Well, exactly, and why would they change when also most organizations that don't prioritize psychological safety, trust, empathy, etc., also have mechanisms in place to almost reward that autocracy, almost reward leading with an iron fist and telling people what to do because it gets the job done. We get high turnover. It's okay, we'll get someone else in because it's short-termism, and we're not actually thinking, and we're not sitting down and going, okay, on paper, yes, I can let go of that person and get someone new in. But actually, hold on, what is the cost? And not just the financial cost to the organization, like hiring fees, etc., but the cost to the culture. We want really creative people, but they're now sitting there going, wow, look how easily they got rid of our colleague. Just like that. Do I feel safe? Do I feel like is that me next? And added to that, then you get organizations who go, we're a family. And you just think, really? I don't think it's,
families don't treat each other like that.
Yeah, you hope not, right? Yeah. There is, and you mentioned Gen Z earlier. That's really important as well, because they are much, much more untrusting of organizations, governments, big business. When they hear these words about family and stuff, they're recoiling. They're like, absolutely. No, we're not 100%. Touching that. It's a big red flag, huge red flag, not going near it. So I think if organizations are really going to take it seriously, okay, fine, talk about your strategic vision, think about, how you want your profit margins to increase and meet your shareholder needs, but also go, how do we want to get there? Is that going to look like? What's the culture we want to create? How are we explicit about our culture? One thing I love about psychological safety is, in amongst all the different things that particularly Amy Edmondson talks about, is this element of transparency. It's like if I'm gonna set the purpose for a project, I'm gonna be explicit about it. If I've got expectations of you, I'm gonna be explicit about it. If I am okay with you trying and failing, I'm gonna be explicit about it. That's what's so lovely, because most of the problems that I face in psychology, whether it's in business or it's in counseling, is people going, well, I assume they would have known that. Oh, good.
Stealth expectations.
Yeah. And that's really where we find the conflicts. People assuming one thing, the other person's assuming the other, and you get that conflict. The more transparent we are with what we expect and what we see and what we should do and those behaviors, I think the better. So often, I'm sure you get this as well. You talk with leaders and you talk about coaching skills. And they're saying to them, well, what kind of questions should I ask? What kind of statements should I make? And I'm like, well, what are you really looking for? And half the time they're going, well, I'd really like them to do this. And I'm like, then say that, or ask the question about how they get there, And I was working with an organization the other day, and we were talking about goal setting. And it just occurred to me, and I don't think this represented their competence. I think this just represented being a human being. But they were saying to me, Rob, one leader was saying to me, Rob, I've got an issue with one of my team members. He's just not as engaged as everyone else. And I've given him that feedback. And I said, okay, great. But what does that mean? Because engaged to you and engaged to me is probably quite different. And he went, oh, no, that's a good question. Okay, so I need to be more specific with my feedback. Yes, please do. Okay, so he's like, well, he's not putting in the same effort as everyone else. I'm like, okay, but what does that mean? And he goes, oh, well, he's just not contributing as much as the other team members. And I'm like, so what does that mean? And I'm like, look, break this down for me. And again, this is not a representation of the competence of that individual. No. It is more about the human brain and how vague we are in descriptions and recognizing things. Absolutely. And so the same happens with, a leader that going, right, we need to take psychological safety seriously, or we need to be more empathic as leaders. Okay, but what does that mean? And are you making it transparent? Are you making it explicit? Do people really know what that means? We always see leaders talking about empathy, so important. And then you sit with them and you go, okay, what does empathy really mean? And that's when you sort of get the eyebrows raising and people going,
put myself in their shoes.
Yeah. So what does that mean? What does that actually mean? So I definitely think there's a way to operationalize, going back to your point, there's a way to operationalize psychological safety. And a big part of that is bringing the behaviors you want to see with your vision and values. I've worked with a few organizations and they've put it into their KPIs. So, yes, I need you to get this done and this done and this done, but also, are you demonstrating these particular behaviors? And then within that, they have appraisals and 360 feedback from their teams about, are they doing that? And I think that's great, because that's psychological safety. Part of it is accountability. A huge part of it's accountability. So if we're going to operationalize psychological safety, we should probably take that big part of psychological safety that's accountability and put it into it as well. Absolutely. There's definitely ways to do it, but I think too many very senior leaders as well maybe don't prioritize psychological safety and putting it into place, because too often I think we look at it and we go, I'm functioning okay as it is.
But that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
That is not sustainable. I'm functioning okay as it is. But if I'm functioning okay, that means at some point I would have had peak performance from my people. So I've just tolerated the decline and I'm happy with okay for now, which means if it's declined, it's going to continue declining. Why would you not want to make those changes? Amy Edmondson. Am I pronouncing it correctly? I was actually, because I forgot how to pronounce her surname. We were talking about her book, and I think she did a part of the research in the book is to do with high performing teams, and one of them was in hospitals, and they were researching two different teams: a team that was classified as high performing and a team that was classified as low performing. And even though the high performing team was a higher performing team, they actually had 20% more mistakes. And she sat back and she was like, that doesn't make sense here. And then when they really looked at it, the high-performing team was just a lot more transparent with the mistakes that they were making, as opposed to the low-performing team who was keeping it all to themselves.
Yes.
And you said the word beautifully earlier is intellectual mistakes. Is that
intelligent mistakes? Intelligent failures.
Intelligent mistakes, intelligent failures, because, we still have to have some form of intention when we do our work. So an intelligent mistake, an intelligent failure, there's space, and in that space comes that creativity and innovation for psychological safety. Another thing that popped up that I wanted to ask you were talking about values in industry or values in organizations. Is there, just in your experience, do you think that there's a rule of thumb of how often you should reevaluate those values for a company culture or engagement?
I don't think there's a rule of thumb, but I would say in the same way. So I first became interested in values when I was doing my clinical work, because someone comes to you and they're depressed. I was mainly using cognitive behavioral therapy, and we know there's a number of techniques and strategies that we put in place to try and alleviate the symptoms of depression and get someone back on track. But what I found was really interesting is that I would work with people, and maybe they'd start a bit more behavioral activation, they start doing more, communicating with their partner a bit more. But more often than not, they'd still turn around to me and they'd say, okay, but I still feel a bit lost. And a lot of the time, the why am I doing what I'm doing would come up. And it really got me interested in values, because it was like, well, okay, look, we could see depression as a biological response to something. We could see it as a situational response to some negative stimuli. A lot of the time it was because people were lost. People were like, well, why am I doing what I'm doing? I've followed this wonderful path that my government's told me to get good grades at school and then go to university and move and find a partner and get a house and a dog and have a couple of kids. And then they're sitting there going, why? Some people are really lucky. They fall into what they love and they do what they love and they connect with it intrinsically. But a lot of the people just don't have that connection. So I became really interested in values then. And then it was great moving into business psychology and seeing that actually they're just as important. So in the same way, I would work with anyone clinically to say, regularly check in on your values because they shift. They shift. And when changes in your life happen, then naturally what you do is going to change as well and what you find important. So, maybe you find autonomy and creativity and freedom really important. And then you maybe have a couple of kids and you think, well, actually now security, I still want that autonomy and that creativity, but actually I do need to have
in hierarchy.
Exactly. Yeah. So regularly we should be checking in and doing it. And I think organizations should be the same. You've heard the VUCA acronym, right? All the time.
Uncertain,
complex and ambiguous.
There we go.
That I think is more prevalent than ever, and not just in this region, just worldwide. The saber rattling from different countries. There's so much going on. Economies change so fast. Everything moves. Everything's complex. So with that, can we just afford to go, okay, here are our values as an organization and they're fixed? It's like, no. So I think every time the senior leadership are coming together to go, what's our strategy? What are we working towards? How are we working towards it? They should be saying, are our values fit for purpose? And checking in. Because worst case scenario, no, they're not. We need to change them and let's do that and let's involve our people. Like, why do we have to make those decisions? Like, why can't we have our people? They're part of this, right? Let's bring them all together. Best case scenario is they fit. Worst case scenario is they don't. But even if they do still fit, what you're also doing is going, look, we're bringing our mind, we're making it transparent, we're making it explicit again. And I think so often we get so task focused and focused on the what are we doing that we're missing the why, and values are all about why. And it's why Simon Sinek talks about, his 3 circles, right? Why and the core. So even if you're not going to change those values, what it will do is it will make everyone explicitly go, why are we doing what we're doing? Let's go back to this, which can only be a good thing, I think, for the organization.
I love that about values. I went through an incredible amount of change personally last year. And one of the things that I really doubled down on was what I valued. And when you've got that, to a certain extent, it brings you a bit of security because you know what you're going to tolerate and you know what you're not going to tolerate. And I think I've always had a sense of a moral compass from, how I was raised and things like that. And, I know what I find important, but I also found to a certain extent, I'm going a bit personal here, stepping away from the business side of things, but I always knew what I liked or what I sort of floated towards or gravitated towards, but it would change just because of the environment, which for me was not grounded enough. And then last year I made a really serious decision in getting grounded in my values. And when I did that, what happened with things around me started to align. You can say law of attraction, you can say anything you want, but things around me started to align with what I value. Yes. And I think with businesses, if they take that approach and go, right, look, for massive organizations to just change your company values is going to be different. But why don't, instead of changing, look at what transformation looks like? Because you're still taking some of the old and bringing in some of the new, and be transparent about it and get people that really value working for the company to work on your new values. There were 2 organizations that I used to work for, and I will never forget the way that they relaunched their values. In particular, one of the first organizations that I worked for here in the Middle East, when they relaunched their company values, I to this day still know them off by heart. I still know what they're supposed to feel like. I still know as a leader from that organization how I'm supposed to inspire them and other people. The way that they launched it was incredible. And I will always hold on to that because it was one of the best culture/value launches. And it just really made me feel part of an incredible company. And that's what values can do.
Yeah. And I just want to pick up on how you started that story then. So the first thing you said was, I'd been through a lot of change. And you said, I knew what the right thing to do was, but that's from like an integrity, morality perspective. And that's what's quite interesting. If we're not talking about the what, our brain often goes to kind of that morality piece. Okay. And that's what happens in businesses. So businesses go, look, here's our strategic framework, for instance, and our vision and goals, values, etc. And we're doing the right things as leaders morally, ethically. So we're good. But it differs. But it differs.
That's quite a little bit, yes.
From
yes.
the value kind of thing. It
Yes.
differs from the value kind of thing. So then you said, what I started to do was think about, why am I doing what I'm doing, the values, etc. And that's what really gave you that peace of mind. And you started to work towards it.
Yeah.
What was also interesting about what you said is things seem to align. And this is really fascinating because there's many people I know who believe in manifesting, okay, and they think that there's an energy which I won't totally throw out because we are all made of energy. I'm a man of science. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, but from a more scientific point of view, what I am aware from a neuroscience perspective is we have something in our brain called the reticular activating system, the RAS. Now I love that because the RAS is there to help us basically go towards what's important to us. So when we goal set, if it truly means something to us and we connect with it emotionally, which means it's not just here in the back of the brain, but it's also in our limbic system, then we're more likely subconsciously to move towards that. So when people go, oh, I've manifested that, I don't want to kind of, rain on their parade too much and go, well, actually, it's your brain. But that's what's happening. Your brain is going, that's important to me. And then you feel like things are aligning. But what you're not doing is being consciously aware of all of those little things that actually make you do, the things that you say yes to, the things that you view online that make you go, actually, yeah, I'm going to do this, or I'm just going to research that. So much is happening subconsciously. But again, that's the important point. So if we take that as an individual basis, but then we put it into business and we go, so what happens if organizations really go, why do we do what we do? Rather than just what are we trying to achieve? This market share, et cetera, this customer experience. But, why do we do what we want to do? Then almost organizationally, we activate that. And then we all start to move in that same direction. And then our leaders unconsciously will demonstrate the right behaviors, not just from a moral, ethical point of view, because you can be an ethical leader, but not be psychologically safe, not be psychologically safe. You can be a moral leader, but not demonstrate empathy. Really, that's the thing. So we can all do it. So when you do that, you align it and you're much more likely to live in a value-based way.
Have I just got a free session with you, Rob? That is incredible. I totally understand the concept, but to hear it articulated like that is like, yes, I'm moral, I'm ethical, I must be a good leader. Right. It doesn't work like that. What is value? Oh my gosh. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. I am going to ask you one big question before we get into the rapid fire questions. And that one big question is particularly living in a region here in Dubai and how fast paced it is and just the business world in general. When things are going 140 kilometers down a highway in 7 different directions, how do you reconnect with yourself?
That's a great question. And actually, I've only been driving in the region for about 2 months now. So the whole 140 kilometers per hour, fast lane, Nissan Patrol flashing it from behind, that rings true with my kind of personal life. And being self-employed, being an entrepreneur, life can be a bit crazy. There's a few things that I need. Fundamentally for me, my foundation is exercise. I talked earlier about why I became a psychologist. Part of that was also mental health based. And I've had my battles with episodic depression over the years. Exercise is fundamental for me. It gives me a base of everything. Yes, it makes you feel good physically, but more so than that, it's my clarity of mind, it's my peace of mind, etc. So that has to be a core foundation. That's really key. I'm a very creative individual. I love creating things, and if we did a personality test on the spectrum from detail focused, conscientious to abstract, I'm right up the abstract end. But interestingly, despite that, structure is important for me, because if I don't get that structure, I start to get too creative and I don't get things done. And if I don't get things done, I don't feel like I'm making progress. If I don't feel like I'm making progress, I start to wobble as well.
Sort of like businesses.
It's almost like practice what you preach. So I think if I can make sure that I've got my exercise as my foundation, that really helps in my mental health. That really gives me my biggest sense of resilience. But on top of that, it's going back to what we said right at the beginning. Do we have empathy? And part of that empathy is emotional intelligence towards ourselves. Can we recognize when we're doing too much? And I keep on top of that for the sake of myself, for the sake of my partner. I keep on top of, where am I? Can I sustain this? Do I need to take a step back? Do I need to do something different of where I am? But at the core of that is what we said about ego, which is I openly accept that I am far from perfect and I am absolutely not indestructible. I am a fallible human being and I cannot do everything. And so I can do a lot, but not everything. And I think holding that belief and then being okay to say to myself, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. Do I get it right all the time? Absolutely not. Are there those times where I'm like, I'm okay. Oh no, I'm not okay. I thought I was okay. I'm not. So I don't get it right all the time. But I think that ability to stand back and go, you know what? It's okay to not be okay. What do I need to do to take care of yourself? Like a very compassionate approach, which I never used to like. I never used to like that word compassion, because to me it felt like making excuses. And actually, the older I'm becoming, the more I'm like, oh no. If you don't take care of yourself, no one else will, and you can't do what you need to do. So actually, you're human. Relax. Take a step back.
I love that. I mean, I sometimes fall into the trap of before I can rest, I've got to just do all of these things like you're jumping through hoops. All right, ready for some rapid fire?
Rapid fire.
Okay, so 5 questions. Here we go. What is the one thing you learned through experience that if you learned it sooner would have changed the course of your life?
Create networks.
Okay.
I'm an entrepreneur, self-employed, always like I must do everything. Now I'm at this point in my life, I was like, I would have created stronger networks, reached out to people, help me with this, help me with that. If I could give any younger people advice, it would be do that. Like, improve yourself, work hard, but networks.
Amazing. Okay, next one. 3 songs on your playlist and why do you love them?
3 songs on my playlist. What have I been listening to? I've been listening to a lot of podcasts. So, 3 songs on my playlist. I've been listening to Dance Monkey because it's one of my daughter's favorite, and that's quite nice. I've been listening to a bit of Einaudi, Ludovico Einaudi, because recently went
brilliant
and saw him live at Dubai Opera, and it was just fantastic. So that's really nice. And Nessun Dorma by Pavarotti, because I don't know, just whenever I listen to it, it's just very moving.
Oh no, it's an incredible song. Or it's incredible music. I know Jennifer Hudson did a rendition of it, and she's not opera, but she pulled it off so beautifully.
I should listen to that one as well.
Yes, you have to. What do people get wrong about you all or most of the time?
I think from an external perspective, before they start talking to me, they might look at me and they might think that I'm quite a conservative, stiff upper lip Brit.
I can vouch for that. Not at all.
Particularly if I'm wearing a suit, right? People are like, "Oh, is he? I don't know. Is he an estate agent? Is he a lawyer? I don't know." And then hopefully, when people get to talk to me, they see that I'm a lot more on the liberal side, and I'm much more people focused, and I don't take myself too seriously, even though it might look like it.
I love it. You are on a private jet, and you can have 3 people with you, famous or not famous. Who are they, and what are you talking about?
Okay, so if I move away from obviously family, because that would be number 1. So let's indulge it a little bit more. What would we talk? Who would it be? Can they be dead?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I would have to have Freud there.
Okay,
because
oh my God, psychology, Freud.
Grandfather of psychology, fascinating. Did most of his deep thinking on cocaine. So I just think a fantastic person to sit down and talk to. I'm not quite sure what would come out there. I have very mixed feelings about Elon Musk. There is part of me that really respects the diversity of businesses that he has and drives for. There's a lot more on how he interacts with people, and I don't like that side of him. But I would, from a psychological perspective, I'd love to sit down and really get a feel for who. I'm pretty sure he's on the spectrum. I'm pretty sure he recognizes he's on the spectrum. I used to do a lot of work in my clinical psychology with people on the spectrum as well. So I'd love to sit down and have more of a conversation with him. 3 people, you said. All right, we'll say the third for quickfire would be the pilot, because I like that.
I love that. All right, so final sentence or final question. Finish the sentence. Getting better at communication is...
really thinking about other people.
Oh, I love that. I think that's great. Awesome. Rob, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me on the Leading with Andrew show. And can't wait to see your book come out. And where can people connect with you?
LinkedIn's probably easiest. Unfortunately, there are about 10 million Rob Stewarts in the world, but
I will
Rob
include
Stewart
your
in
LinkedIn
Dubai,
link
and
in
you'll
the
find me.
podcast post. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Well, there you go. Another episode on communication. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, connect with us on Instagram at Leading with Andrew.